super duper. So we're going to go ahead and get going. We won't have a heck of a lot of time today. We got a little delayed, and then obviously with the other stuff happening around the building, it's a busy time. But did just want to take an opportunity to talk with you folks a little bit about a couple things, and also take Q&A at the end. That way we can touch base with you all before the weekend here. So today's briefing is going to be a little different than others. I think the way that I could best describe it is notifying the public vis-a-vis you all about what's happening under the dome here as we head into the last month. Things start flying around and get quite busy, and it's easy for some of these bad ideas to slip under the radar and go completely unnoticed until they've taken effect and are starting to negatively impact the lives of many people. So we wanted to take a moment here to note a few of those and make sure that folks have an opportunity to weigh in on the legislative process and the lawmaking process through their elected officials. And so my colleagues here are going to outline a number of those different proposals for you today. And I'm going to kick it off first with Senator Libby. If you are you good to go? Okay, super. Who's going to talk about a couple of different things happening in his purview.
Okay, well, the first thing we're going to do is talk about the community colleges. And so we really have a situation where Maine people don't really have the full story on the tuition program, the free tuition program that we offer at the community college level. And so there's a lot of layers to this. You know, one of the problems is that it started with an athletics layer to it. Some coaches had reported that some student athletes were being brought in from out of state and recruited to a campus, and that they were receiving the community college, the Maine free scholarship. And come to find out when you examine the language, that's the case. So it's really something that wasn't indicated by the governor's office or really anybody in the legislative process, and it applies not just to athletes, it applies to everybody. If you come in from out of state, you could be a non-citizen, then all of a sudden you can receive this scholarship, free tuition on the Maine taxpayer. And I think the reason it's such a bad bill is because there's an infinite number of students that can receive a scholarship on the Maine taxpayer. It's a pretty simple concept, and it's surprising that we've gotten to this point and really not talked about it. I mean, it's already in law, occurred last year, so here we are. I brought with me the brochure that was put out by the Maine Community College System. I've got a couple of them if you want to see them, but this brochure, when you open it up, there's some bullet points on who can receive the scholarship, and that's where you learn that it's basically an infinite number of people. Not only does it say Maine citizens, but non-citizens qualify for the scholarship. Non-citizens. So that's the number one proposal that I believe is maybe the worst bill that we've passed in a decade, and that's, you know, just in my opinion, because there have been plenty of bad bills around here, but that is the one that we have, I think, that is probably the worst. So I think I'm going to maybe just leave it at that one and turn it over.
Okay, Lisa.
Yeah.
Well, vying for bad bills is LD 1735, which basically would make Maine a sanctuary state for gender care, gender transitioning care for a minor. And this really should make every parent in the nation nervous, because what this bill would allow is for one parent or guardian of a child, regardless of what the custody arrangements are, for them to bring their child to the state of Maine to have gender transitioning care. And the court also can take temporary jurisdiction of a child if the child seeks mental or physical gender affirming care. And one of the things that we need to remember when we talk about any gender transitioning care is that in the state of Maine, we've already passed a law that if someone is counseling a child around gender dysphoria or any of the gender concerns that they may have about being in the wrong body, and those of the things that are being talked about. We've already passed a law in the state of Maine which makes it so that counseling can only go one way. You are never allowed to counsel a child about their options. If a child comes to you and says, I'm a girl, but I feel like a boy, they're only allowed to say, well, here's the way you can change to be a boy. You're obviously a boy. They're not allowed to say, would you like to bring your mind into alignment with your body? It's only to say you have to force your body to change like your mind. So any child that comes to the state of Maine to seek this care, and if they're going to have this type of counseling, it's a one-way street already in the state of Maine. So this law would supersede any parental custody laws, even if the parent by order in another state is not allowed to cross state lines with their child. That child can be brought to the state of Maine. They can claim asylum based on the fact that they are there for gender affirming care. So this is law enforcement would not be allowed to get involved if there's anything like what we would normally have, which is Amber Alerts for a child that's been taken across state lines. That doesn't apply here. The law enforcement would be totally hands-off, and it's all for what someone would claim to be gender-affirming care. And that makes a lot of questions arise, like what about child trafficking? What happens to the safety of this child? What if this gender-affirming care goes wrong? Who's taking care of the child then? So this is a terrible position to put our courts in. It's a terrible position to put children in and parents. And it's a terrible position to put our state in. We do not want to be known as the go-to state to have parents' rights stripped away and have children permanently changed without their parents even knowing, possibly. So that really tops it on my list for one of the very worst bills we'll be hearing this session. Thank you.
Next up is a really bad bill that I heard about from a constituent who sent me a picture of the bill jacket and said, this is a hoax, right? This is spam? I was like, no, this is actually a real bill. And it's found to be the crown jewel of radicalism in these bills we're looking at this year. LD 1949, a bill introduced by the Speaker that removes all homestead protections for homeowners, renters, property protections for businesses, even cemeteries. The bill would prohibit the prosecution of any person who breaks into any dwelling or structure if the person claims to be homeless or is seeking shelter. And it could be homeless for that one day. It doesn't have to be any long-term. If they are seeking shelter, then they have the right to break into private property. It puts every single home, camp, second home, rental property in jeopardy, as there is no penalty for breaking and entering. This would be your garage, your she shed, your hunting camp, your home. You could come home and find these people in your house, and there would be no legal action taken against them if they claim to be seeking shelter. It also would threaten your insurance coverage by leaving you liable for that person's conduct on or in your property. And most importantly, this bill could have gotten people killed, because when someone is breaking into your house, it's a pretty serious situation. So this would put even the person seeking shelter into a terrible position. There's been a huge public outcry on this one, and it was on the calendar today to be withdrawn. But the fact that the Speaker of the House thought this would be a good idea for the state of Maine shows how radical the progressives are.
Good afternoon, Senator Matt Harrington. I'm a Republican lead on the Criminal Justice Committee. There are two bills this year, LDs 1429 and 1819, both looking to roll back and decriminalize operating after suspension in Maine. These two bills seek to roll back Tina's Law, which was enacted after a series of fatal motor vehicle accidents in Maine caused by habitual offenders. We worked LD 429 in the Criminal Justice Committee. The majority report of that bill sought to remove the decriminalization of operating after suspension. The sponsor of LD 1819, however, was not happy with that result. Shopped the committee, shopped that bill to the Transportation Committee, and even said in committee he didn't get the result he wanted on LD 1429 in the Criminal Justice Committee, so he was pushing it in the Transportation Committee to get a more favorable result. He said this in committee. This isn't how the legislature should govern. These bills would significantly put Maine lives in danger on Maine roads. Another bill that we heard in the Criminal Justice Committee was LD 22, an act to impede the transfer of firearms to prohibited persons. And albeit a well-intentioned bill and drafted as amended, will cause major concerns around antique firearms. Republicans on the committee agree that we don't support straw purchasers and we don't want criminals to get firearms. However, our efforts to come to a consensus were rebuked when asked that the definition of firearms simply match federal law. Our concerns went unheard, and now there's a majority report that will not be supported by Republicans because Democrats want to infringe on Mainers' rights to purchase muzzle loaders through federal firearms dealers. Yes, you heard that right, muzzle loaders somehow is now in the crosshairs of Democrats in Maine. Republicans will not support the legislation that potentially entraps law-abiding gun dealers who sell antique or black powder firearms. There is no way for these dealers to conduct background check on these for the purchase of these firearms, and that will be required by the Democratic majority report. This bill could have been bipartisan, but the sponsor and my Democrat colleagues on the committee refused to work with the Republicans to tackle the real problem, ensuring violent criminals don't have access to firearms.
Thanks, Senator Harrington. I'll just note, too, I think dovetailing with Senator Guerin's testimony, advocacy works, as evident by LD 1949. So that underscores our goal today here, which is to encourage folks to reach out if they feel any of these bills are going to be putting either them or their family or their business or their community in jeopardy. Please reach out, particularly if you're represented by a Democrat in the legislature, and ask them to do the right thing here. I'll also note, in regards to Senator Harrington's testimony, there's a number of efforts in the legislature right now that deal with decriminalization, both of certain acts, but also in terms of drugs, in both possession and potential trafficking. That's something that folks should be aware of as we work through the rest of the session here. That would be a complete misstep in my mind and in the minds of those members of law enforcement who have contacted our caucus that are very concerned about the potential consequences there if we move the wrong way with regard to criminalization of both possession and trafficking. That's going to be putting the dealers in the driver's seat here in Maine and moving us totally the wrong direction on the opioid crisis. So again, just underscoring, please reach out to your members in the legislature and encourage them to do the right thing and stick up for you and your family. With that, I know we're crunched on time and folks need to leave soon, but happy to take a few questions here before we all take off. Yep, go ahead.
Senator, we just heard from some of your leadership counterparts outside advocating for 1969 paid family medical leave bill. We know that there's been so much talk about this lately, but just on the day of the hearing, what would your reaction be to their advocacy for the bill, and just in general, why does your caucus oppose this bill?
Well, I think we oppose what's being currently proposed by the advocates. And certainly the referendum, look, if you've got a gun to your head, why would you negotiate with that person in good faith? There's just no incentive there. And what I've seen so far this entire session is that the socialists and the communists at the Maine People's Alliance have put this gun to the head of the legislature and said, if you don't do this, we're dropping in a referendum and it's going to pass. Well, maybe it passes, maybe it doesn't, but I think the reality is that as people learn more about this new tax on both employers and employees, they're not actually in support of it. A lot of places already have some type of paid leave program, and of course businesses can do this already, and in fact as the labor market tightens, the need to be more competitive in the labor market increases. And so I think letting the private sector figure out a way to move forward there makes a lot of sense. But if there is going to be some kind of compromise proposal here this session on this issue, it's not going to be done with bad faith negotiations, which is to this point all that I've seen out of the advocates. You know, instead of 100%, they've come down just a little bit on what their demand is. But this would be one of the most far-reaching, if not the most far-reaching, paid family leave laws in the country. And it's something that everybody should be very aware of and very concerned about, because it will be absolutely crippling for small business in Maine and hurt both employers and employees. I can't underscore that point enough. This will be a tax on the workers themselves as well. Anybody else? Any other questions for today? Yeah, go ahead, Penny.
Could we get a little bit more information about the athletes that are being recruited? Through the-
Sure. That would be great. And I think the first thing that really we should talk about is level playing field on in a game, right? So imagine you're a team from Massachusetts and you compete against a community college, but you're not able to give a free tuition to every single player on the bench, but in Maine they are. Guess what's going to happen? That team will probably get dropped from the schedule. One of our teams, CM, SM, they're not going to play them. But B, there'll be a sanction. And this could be crippling to the community college system if athletes have been recruited to go to the whatever team, and which is fine. We've been doing that for years, right? But then all of a sudden they're told no playoffs for you, because that's typically what the sanction is. You can't compete in the nationals. And there's no way to correct it. There's no way to correct it. So the coaches know that, and this is bubbled up from the coaches. There's a second layer to it, right? If you maybe were being recruited by a Division II, where Division II can give scholarships, NCAA Division II, maybe you were being recruited or you were seeking a scholarship out of state. Well, now I can just stay home and I can get a full tuition scholarship, go to community college and learn to be a nurse or, whatever else. And why wouldn't you? So some students have chosen that. And some students that I know, and I'm very familiar, by the way, with the level of talent in Maine, because I'm involved with youth sports. And so some students have already chosen to go to a Maine community college. So you can expect that their teams are going to be gosh darn good, and that their opposing coaches are going to be absolutely disgusted. Because how can they compete against free? How can they compete against free? It's just an unbelievable circumstance, and it wasn't. I couldn't believe it wasn't anticipated by the president of the community college system. We talked to him yesterday, and basically Heidi Sampson, Representative Sampson, and myself talked to him yesterday, and basically what he said was, "Yep, this is an intentional program. It's a pro-labor program. We're going to train people. We're going to bring people in from the outside. We're going to train them. They're going to enter the workforce." For a second there, I thought I was back in the Labor Committee, which is where I served back in 1993. I thought I was in the Labor Committee. It was a labor issue. We can't be on the backs of Maine taxpayers giving an infinite amount of athletic scholarships to anyone who comes in. And remember, at the community college level, there really aren't the same. Like, it's not like I have to have an SAT of whatever level. You're going to get any kind of player can run, jump, and dunk on a basketball court, and these other teams aren't going to be able to compete against them. It's an unbelievably unfair playing field. So never mind the fact that we're going to have to pay for scholarships from people from outside the country potentially, but in terms of like the athletic competitiveness, they've blown it up. The state of Maine has blown up athletics in the community college system. Unbelievable.
You're talking potential, though. Is it actually happening already?
Yeah.
Can you give examples of that?
We have some examples. I don't want to use names. No, I don't want to do that here, no. But we do have examples. We've got the coaches who have talked to us. We have, I've talked to coaches, athletic directors, and I also know some players that have opted to go to the community college in the fall. They're out there. And I don't know if I have an example of an out-of-state player, anyone I've talked to there. I understand there might be some, but I don't know. But there will be, as long as they get free tuition, you know. And so the part of the language that I think where people didn't pick up on this is that you're eligible for the free Maine college scholarship tuition grant, if you will. Once you get here, you can actually get to the residence hall and you can establish that you're a Mainer once you're in the hall. As opposed to the language saying upon application if you're a Maine resident, or what we want to see, the Republicans want to see, and that is that a Maine high school graduate get the free college. And that's what everybody thought. And in fact, if you examine the governor's speeches and the information that came out of the governor's office, it basically said that. It said that Maine graduates were going to get this scholarship. To me, it's just, that's why I said it's the worst. It's part of the budget bill, but it's the worst thing that I've seen. I said a decade, but I don't think that the implications were thought through at all, not just from the standpoint of the community colleges. Think about the application increases. We got from CC, their increase in applications is over 400%. They're putting students, apparently they're going to put them into hotels. And then finally, I think they're talking to the humane system about trying to house them there. And the privates, of course, have to compete against this. If I'm a private school, I work at Thomas College, but if I'm a private school, it's pretty tough to compete against free too. You know, so it's absolutely a shame what's happened here, and it's actually a mess. It's not like we're going to be able to clean up this mess. This is going to take a long period of time to figure out what do we do about athletics. It's one thing to tell Maine people you're going to pay for out of state. You might even pay for out of country people. It's one thing to tell them that. It's another to correct this athletics error. This is significant. I think we're going to get a sanction from the national governing board, I think.
We've got time for one more question, and then we got to wrap, folks. Okay. Thank you all. Have a good weekend. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.